our chat this evening on financial aid. All the questions you might have before you apply, we're going to speak both specifically about our institutions, but also with some general truisms and some cautions about common mistakes and good common knowledge to have as you go throughout the process, even if you're not specifically applying to Franklin and Marshall College or Macalaster. There is a chat feature, and as moderator, I will be keeping an eye on our chat. If you have a question as we go along, feel free to send your question in even prior to us asking if anyone has any questions, because we'll include that question right as we go along as we talk to my two colleagues. And so I think now is a good time for us to go ahead and get started. I will ask them each to introduce themselves, starting with Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much to Carly and Franklin and Marshall College for inviting me in on this wonderful webinar and panel on such a great topic. I hope that I can be informative this evening. As Carly mentioned, my name is Sarah Schmidt. I'm an associate director at Macalaster College, a liberal arts and science style college in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I believe this is actually entering in my 14th year in admissions, but I also do have some financial aid experience from my career as well.
And Robin from F&M.
Hi, everyone. My name is Robin Gorini, and I am the Associate Director, or I should say one of the Assistant Directors of Financial Aid at Franklin and Marshall College. I have a lot of experience in financial aid, from working in a community college to a four-year public and now four-year private. So I'm not going to tell you how many years that has encompassed, but definitely a lot of years of working in financial aid. So I have a lot of information up here and looking forward to addressing your questions. And thank you for being here tonight.
Great. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with just some foundational background information. And as I said, as you may send in questions, we'll address those as we go. To start off with, I'll ask Sarah to touch on the forms that Macalaster accepts or requires and when they're due.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Carly. And I'll just preface this by saying that these documents are what we require of US citizens and permanent residents. If you are an international student, there's a slightly different application process for applying for need-based financial aid. In either case, regardless of whether you are a US citizen, permanent resident, or a domestic US student, you do need to apply for need-based financial aid at Macalaster at the same time that you are applying for admission. Please do not wait until after you have received a admissions decision before you start asking about financial aid. For US citizens, we typically do give a little bit of a grace period after our application deadlines for each of our 4 rounds for those financial aid documents to come in. So for example, our early decision 1 and early action deadlines are coming up on November 1st, but the priority deadline for the financial aid application forms is about a week later on November 8th. And that's a similar pattern for our later rounds as well. Just know that even then, we understand that there may be some difficulty gathering information. So you're always encouraged to reach out and let us know what's happening. And there could be even more flexibility beyond that. So in terms of what's required to apply for need-based aid, there are several parts. For US citizens and permanent residents, number 1, the FAFSA. That's the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. That is kind of your first go-to. Second, we also do require students to submit the CSS Profile. This has much more in-depth information than what the FAFSA does, and we primarily use the CSS profile to help us gain a more full understanding of a family's financial picture so that we can understand the best way to use our own institutional aid funds. In support of those two applications, we also require families to submit tax documents. We use IDOC submission. Information about that is on website. I will note that typically we ask families to use prior year. So for 2021 to 2022, this upcoming year, that most typically means the 2019 tax year. I'll also note that we do provide an early financial aid assessment for students that are considering early decision, but really need to know what that need-based aid calculation might look like before committing to that early decision round. So those are the primary documents. And of course, the websites are the best place to see all that information.
Thank you. And same question for F&M for Robin. The forms that we require if you are a U.S. citizen applying for financial aid and when they're due.
So I pretty much want to, for lack of a better word, echo what Sarah just said. Excuse me, we also require the FAFSA as well as the CSS profile. We have early decision deadline dates. Though the two dates are November 15th for early decision 1 and for early decision 2, that thing, Carly, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's January 15th. And we also provide an early estimate of financial aid. As a matter of fact, excuse me, for an early estimate of financial aid, that deadline to get one is coming up as of October 30th. So for anybody interested in ED1, I think as Sarah would agree, what's really nice about getting an early estimate of financial aid is at least you'll have an idea as to what your your need-based financial aid will be before you sign on the dotted line committing to early decision. One of the things too, I also want to mention about with the FAFSA is that it's important to, number one, pay attention to the deadline dates, both for the FAFSA and the CSS profile, to pay attention to the deadline dates that the colleges require these forms. And generally speaking, when you gather the deadline dates that your financial aid applications are required, go with the earliest deadline date and get your applications in by that date. So if College A wants your financial aid forms in, let's say by November 1st, and College B wants it in by November 15th, get those forms in by November 1st. Remember, you don't have to list a college on the FAFSA you don't have to be accepted to a college in order to list it on the FAFSA. The important thing is to get the college the information regarding your financial aid, regarding your financial information. So it's important to adhere to getting those documents in on time. We also require tax information, and one of the nice things that we use is with the CSS profile, we use the College Board's documentation submission service called IDOC, IDOC. So after you submit the CSS profile, you'll get an email with a code that allows you to submit your federal tax documents or to upload them. And it's the most secure way to provide us your tax documents.
Super. Okay. One other question I would just want to detail, because I do get so many questions regarding the CSS profile, so I'll direct this to Robin, is what the basis of that calculation is and how your your demonstrated need can be calculated differently by different colleges.
What happens with the CSS profile is just like the FAFSA, it generates what's called an expected family contribution. But this, and that's EFC for short. And so what happens is that the college gets to determine with the CSS profile what specifically they want to factor in determining that EFC. So for example, some colleges may consider if your family is paying tuition to a private secondary school. Some colleges don't. Some colleges may factor in your family's home equity being the difference of what is owed on the home versus the home's value. Some colleges won't. And this has an impact on the expected family contribution. And so sometimes that EFC may be the same as the EFC that's generated by the FAFSA. It could be a little bit higher. It could be a little bit lower. So every college that uses the CSS profile, the EFC can be different in determining your eligibility for need-based aid. What's also nice about that is sometimes the college may have a little bit of flexibility with that EFC as well. But once again, it differs from college to college.
Okay. And Sarah, at Macalaster, a number of students ask about the adjustment of aid from year to year. Will it be different? What's required? Can you detail that a little bit?
Certainly. So you do need to reapply and resubmit your FAFSA and your forms each year. For US citizens and permanent residents, again, we have a slightly different process for international students. And so that will be kind of taking into account if there are major changes in your family's financial situation. I will apologize and say I'm not entirely sure on whether Macalaster will make changes to their institutional grants and scholarships, but certainly there could be circumstances where a family who didn't qualify for certain need-based federal aid one year may qualify for it the next year. That could be a Pell Grant, that could be the form of a subsidized student loan. So I can certainly follow up with my colleagues, or your best bet usually is to just email our financial aid office for those types of very specific questions. But in general, we find that it's, a family's contribution usually is pretty similar year to year. Obviously, we're in extraordinary time. So we will see how that goes. But I will say in general, Macalaster, and I think this is true of many schools, like we try to have a family forward, a student forward approach. And even if it's not always the answer that a family is hoping for, there is never a penalty for asking questions, for wondering about the process. They know that it can be complicated. We know that there are families experiencing incredibly different circumstances, and they want to have those conversations with you. Don't just sit there and guess or immediately say, oh, well, this doesn't apply to me because X. Always reach out and ask questions, and ask early.
It's very good advice. And students should be cognizant of the fact that information on third-party websites. So if you're using a college search engine, even if that's super handy to do groupings by major of what colleges might be a good fit for you, those third-party websites do often take 2 or 3 years to get new updated information to percolate down. And so the one thing that can be really inaccurate on niche, or there's a couple other, there's one that's like College Sleuth or something. they're going to often be a little out of date in financial aid specifically. If there's a change in required documents, if there's a change in a policy for domestic students, merit aid, international students, any cohort in particular, that's something you should go directly to the source for the most updated information for this year, particularly in a year like this. And you may even see a COVID-19 addition to a lot of websites, whether it's housing, matriculation, activities, visiting, and look for those updates on those college.edu specific websites. Okay. Robin, same question for F&M about updating or the potential to change aid from year to year.
Yeah, most definitely. Like Sarah said, students need to reapply every year. And, you know, ditto as far as generally we see that the, generally speaking, financial aid will pretty much stay the same if the family's income pretty much stays the same from year to year. You know, if there are extenuating circumstances, as you just said, Carly, please get in touch with us. One of the things that I want to mention is on the CSS profile, there is a box called special circumstances that I always encourage families to put something in there if there's something you want the financial aid administrator to be aware of, but also to be proactive and to contact the school as well, because we get a lot of these profile forms and it doesn't hurt to be proactive. So in addition to putting something on the form, to contact the Office of Financial Aid as well. We're getting a lot of inquiries right now where the forms do require the 2019 income information. And like you said, 2020 has been an unusual year for a lot of families. And we do have the option, it falls under what's called professional judgment, to possibly reevaluate a financial aid package using 2020 income. But that falls under an appeal, but you also need to have this discussion with each college that you are applying to find out what is their policy, what is their procedure, and if it's possible. So that's, once again, something I encourage you all to contact the respective schools that you are applying to find out what is their procedure in doing an appeal.
Thank you. We had a question come in about, is it possible to know which schools prioritize certain parts of the CSS profile? For example, some schools will care about students attending a private school versus others not caring. Robin, do you know what that might? I'm afraid I also don't know exactly what this is referring to. It may pertain to whether colleges take into account some costs or funds that families are paying versus not, questions that they ask about household expenditures. If you rephrase that a little bit, we may be able to tackle that one.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another question that has come in saying, though need-based aid differs across institutions, does F&M consider international students who can demonstrate need, and does the amount of aid a student needs make them more or less competitive for admission? This question I'll ask Sarah to field because it's going to get into the definitions of reading need aware or need blind. And so Sarah, can you answer that for us?
Yeah, definitely. So, and I think that's a pretty common question we get, and it usually stops just at that question. Are you need aware or are you need blind? What these terms mean, first of all, when you're asking that question, you're actually asking about a school's admission policies. You're not necessarily asking about their financial aid policies, because need aware and need blind are terms that refer to what information is a admissions office using or not using when making their admissions decision. If a school is need blind, it means that when they make an admissions decision, they are not including information about if a student is applying for financial aid, and if they are, how much aid they might need. They're not considering that piece at all. They're looking at the application for admission and making their decision independent of that. Schools that are need aware are schools that are still prioritizing all of the information in the application for admission, but one factor that could play a role in a final decision is, did the student apply for aid? And if so, how much aid does that student need? In general, there's kind of this feeling that if a school is need aware, then a student is automatically at a disadvantage if they apply for aid. And depending on the school, I will say from Macalaster's perspective, that financial need piece really only comes in on a small portion of our admissions decisions. There are lots of students that we admit who are wonderful, and we want to admit them, even though they are applying for financial aid. So just because you're applying for aid does not mean that you're automatically going to be denied from a school that is need aware. The second question everyone should ask, and often they forget to ask, is, does your school meet 100% of demonstrated need? And especially for international students, your first question is actually, do you provide need-based aid for international students? Because not all schools have that commitment. Thankfully, Macalaster and F&M both do. But then the second question is, if you provide need-based aid, do you meet 100% of need? A school that is need blind in their admissions does not mean that they are also providing need-based aid for international students or promising to meet 100% of demonstrated need. There are some schools that are able to do both, and you can count them on one hand. They're very rare, and they are some of the most elite, difficult to get into institutions. So bear that in mind. The vast majority of schools that are need aware often they're need aware because they're trying to have as generous a financial aid policy as possible. And certainly for many schools like Macalaster, that means meeting 100% of demonstrated need for every school we admit. But to be able to do that, especially for international students, because we're not getting any government aid to help with that like we do with US citizens. So every single bit of money that is going towards a financial aid package for an international student, that is coming usually directly from the institution. So we want to make doubly sure that we can make that promise, and that's where need aware comes in. So that is a long way of explaining that the majority of schools like Macalaster for international students tend to be need aware in their admissions decision. And that does have an impact on the competitive pool that you might be in. Typically, international students who need the highest levels of need-based financial aid, that is the single most competitive applicant pool often that you can be in, especially at those institutions that are saying that they will meet 100% of need for international students. So that doesn't mean, again, kind of similar, just because you're an international student who is applying for aid under need aware doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be denied unless the school doesn't provide aid. But the amount of aid that you need can have a hand in how competitive that process is going to be for you.
And much of that is also going to be true at F&M as well. Readers will know, and again, at the vast majority of colleges and universities, this will be true. Readers will know generally, are you someone who is asking for a low or middle or high amount of institutional aid? So that is aid dollars that don't need to be repaid after your graduation. And those resources are, of course, finite. There are very few colleges and universities that will have the multi-$100 million endowment to be able to truly read need blind. And there are some different delineations of reading need blind and decision-making need blind. Some schools will differentiate between those two things. But it is generally true, and of course we're being very, very transparent with you, that the colleges that are looking for who is going to be awarded that finite number of very high tier aid awards is looking for also who is going to be highly impactful on their campus. And at many of your college nights, or if you meet admission representatives on campuses, they'll share the concept of college fit. And that's going to be very impactful in admission decisions as they consider, of course, a number of students who are academically qualified, have the potential to thrive at F&M or a place like Macalaster as well. The secondary threshold, if they are applying for a nearly full or high aid award, is going to be what impact is this individual going to have on our community, whether they're in very traditional leadership roles like student council and Model UN or class president, or non-traditional student roles like starting the very first rugby team that we had as a club sport, or someone who is going to be a tutor or teach a native language that they speak very well that's unique and we don't offer in a department. Some of those contributions to campus are, of course, just as valuable. Those students that are the glue that hold campus together don't have to all be that type A class president kind of leader, but we are certainly going to look for every individual's potential to contribute to campus as a community member. Both of our campuses are 100% residential. Is that right, Macalaster, with a nod?
So we do not guarantee housing for all 4 years, but you are required to live on campus for the first 2 years.
Mhm.
Part of that is because of our urban location. It's actually very popular for our juniors and seniors to get apartments, usually within about 6 blocks of campus.
So I'll say highly residential, and 6 blocks is not far. So highly residential communities. And that basis does indicate you're going to be part of a very cohesive place. And the institutions are also by nature a little smaller than humongous state university campuses. And so that means that we're looking for every community member to be someone who's invested in being part of the college. And so that will play a role in the admission decision for students who are asking for aid at a need-aware institution. Again, 99% of the something like 4,600 higher education institutions in the US will have at least some part of that in their read process. Okay, I'd like to ask Robin to chime in on a couple topics we get a number of questions on: work study and loans. So can you talk a little bit about how those two elements are going to factor into a financial aid package for a student receiving, let's say, a very medium aid award?
Sure. Well, if anything, I would say the majority of our students' financial aid packages do have work study and loans included in their package, because for us, our packages include the self-help aid, the work study and loans, as well as gift aid, which would be your grants. So with loans, and I'm also including international students in that group. Sorry, it's a little late here. Anyway, so with loans, we will package the federal direct student loan, which is when you fill out the FAFSA, that's part of that comes from the FAFSA, as well as, excuse me, and the federal direct student loan, the maximum amount for a first-year student is $5,500. In some cases, we will also package an F&M loan. With work study, the general amount that we offer is $1,900, and that $1,900 student can earn over the 9 months that they're enrolled. It's a lot of students think, oh, I can only earn $950 in the fall and $950 in the spring. No, if you earn, which I very much doubt, to earn the full $1,900 in one semester. But basically, that's what a student can earn over the 9 months. And at F&M, students can work up to 10 hours per week. And they earn the minimum wage here in PA, which is $8.25 an hour. Not all students, you don't have to take the loan if you're offered the loan. And specifically with the federal direct student loan, If you're offered the federal direct student loan, you can either A, accept the loan, B, deny, say, no, I don't want the loan, or C, you can say, yes, I'll take the loan, but I would like to reduce the amount. And a lot of students aren't aware of that. And I think the federal direct student loan, believe it or not, and I was the recipient of one, is one of the nicest loans you'll ever come across in your whole entire life once you get out of school. So that's basically what you will find in a financial aid package from Franklin and Marshall College. Did I get what you were going for, Carly?
Yes, you did. Thank you. A number of students will have the idea, I know I did, I was applying to FNM specifically, that if they work on campus, very common misconception is that your paycheck is going to circle right back and go into tuition, as if the college had sort of fronted something and you're reimbursing. Common question.
That's correct. Yeah, work study is not there to pay your bill. Work study is more of your pocket change for the weekends, for the pizza. We have a few pizza places near campus. We also have other restaurants, which are pretty good as well. But it's more of your pocket change to pay for the incidentals that you might come across during the week or on the weekends.
Okay. Another common question we get quite a bit is in regards to some of the extras that campus offers, like study abroad, and whether financial aid will apply to things like on-campus housing, off-campus housing, as Sarah just mentioned, and study abroad. So Sarah, first, could you describe some of those things that financial aid will cover versus not cover?
Yep, definitely. So a lot will depend on the level of financial need that a student has in terms of how much aid they're receiving. For students that decide to move off campus, again, about half of our juniors and seniors opt to do that. They're depending on their need level, there might be a small on-campus housing grant that they'll no longer receive, but the majority of their financial aid stays intact. And so what will often happen is after your aid has been fully applied to your bill for that semester, typically students who have the financial need and large enough financial aid packages who are living off campus will then have a pretty sizable overage in terms of their aid after it's been applied to the bill. And students can then fill out a form to have that paid to them as a refund. And that refund then becomes the money that they're using to pay their rent, pay their utilities. Usually students have some roommates. So that's how it typically works for students who are living off campus. Things like study away. We do actually have some majors that require students to study abroad. So there are definitely study away programs where a student's Macalaster financial aid will travel with them. However, that's not true of every single program that we have an agreement with. And so usually what students will do is they'll have an individual appointment with our study away advisors, usually early on. And part of that discussion will be, is financial aid a factor in your study away process? And if it is, let's make sure that we are driving you to all of the wonderful study abroad options that are also going to be a financial fit. Applying to study abroad programs is almost like applying to mini college again. And so they're going to want to make sure that you're also making that connection and that good fit for your study away program. And financial aid is a part of that.
Super. In the vein of the work study question about students who are interested in having applicable work experiences, building an academic or personal resume, and of course, earning some much needed funds. I'd also like to touch on something you may not have known we were going to mention in a financial aid seminar, and that is some of the grants that the colleges offer for students who are doing research or students who are doing an internship. It's certainly going to be an amenity that the college can subsidize internships that may not otherwise have had funding. And I can tell by Sarah's nodding, I think Macalaster is going to do that same thing as well. I think that's a popular thing for colleges to fund, to allow students to go out in the field and get those experiences. And also over the summer, I'll speak specifically about one program at F&M and invite Sarah to describe a couple at Macalaster as well. We have a summer research program that will offer students the opportunity to conduct research on their own hypothesis for credit towards their major, towards graduation, when they don't need to focus on anything else but that. So away from sports seasons, away from everyone being on campus, when they have access to the facilities and labs, our Hackman Research Funds will allow students to have a stipend to stay on campus and conduct that research, because there are additional costs, of course, to staying in Lancaster rather than going home to families. And this would apply to students who are going to be far from campus, close by campus. That will help cover their housing. It will replace maybe the possibility that they would have gotten a campus or an off-campus job over the summer instead. And that's certainly going to serve them twofold then, as that becomes a major academic resume bullet point to have done that research. There's also, of course, grants that are available to students, specifically department by department. You can be a sophomore or a junior, for example, and be eligible for that little bit of funding that you weren't necessarily prior. Sarah at Macalaster, I'm sure there's a few of similar options.
Absolutely. And I would recommend anyone who's interested to check out our career explorations. Just search our site for career explorations, and you'll get to dive into like all the different types of internship and work grants that we have available. We do offer a grant specifically for students to take on an unpaid or underpaid internship at least once during their time at Macalaster, usually a summer internship. In addition, we also have some really cool grants for students who want to engage in projects specifically related to global citizenship, however that applies to them. So we have something called the Live It Fund, which is specifically funding for either an individual or a group project. Sometimes it's research, sometimes it's a creative endeavor. This past January, before everything locked down, there was one student that was looking at Vietnamese American culture in Seattle through food. Another student used one for creating an entrepreneurship online course for budding entrepreneurs in Vietnam. There's also then an ability to take that even further with additional grants and funding for summer work as well. But definitely plenty of opportunities. And I'll also mention that faculty, one of the benefits of being at smaller liberal arts colleges like Franklin Marshall and F&M is that often there might be grants or funding available for department specific or topics or field specific work that your faculty will know of. So even though it's a grant that's not specific to Macalaster or F&M, maybe it's a national organization that specifically sets aside money so that students can have an opportunity. But because you have such close interactions with your faculty, they're often going to be the ones, as you're just chatting with them, mentioning, hey, I noticed you're really interested in this. There's actually a grant through the National Whatever Society, and I think you would have a really good application for this idea that you have for the summer. Let's go through this. So again, lots of different ways to find that funding, and lots of different resources, even beyond kind of the obvious departments on our campuses to help you with that.
Super, thank you. There is a question here from one of our international listeners. It must be very late or very early where you are, that I'll answer just briefly regarding being able to work on campus. And of course, international students on an F1 visa are permitted to work, but only on their own college campus. So not at one of the pizza places down the street, but just on their own college campus in a work-study position, for example, and also only for 10 hours a week during school sessions, so when classes are active, and more hours during breaks, which can be a popular way to earn some funding, for example, over the holiday break, which is like a month long. But there will be different ramifications. But yes, the students, international students, are eligible for work study and can have work study packaged in their financial aid. This next question I'll ask Robin to field has come in, is asking about how students go about finding or applying for campus jobs. If it's included in their financial aid package, is everything very automatic, or what is a student's responsibility if they want to have a paid student position?
Well, what happens is that we have a wonderful office on campus through our OSPGOD, the Office of Student Graduate. We just call it OSPGOD. Anyway, we do have a student employment office. And what happens is that we provide to them a list of students who have been offered work study. And then those students who have accepted work study. So basically when you're given your financial aid package, you do have to go in and either accept or decline the funds. And so if you accept work study, then your name is on a list, and that list is provided to the student employment office. And then they get in touch with you to let you know you can either attend a student employment fair, for lack of a better word, or you can contact departments on your own. Now, sometimes this changes from year to year. So I'm sort of on the outside of this because this is handled by a different office. But basically, you go on, for lack of a better word, a job interview. So either A, you can either contact the student employment office, student employment office will contact you to let you know, hey, do you want to look at these departments that seem to meet your interests? Because you are sent a questionnaire, I left that part out. Or do you want to attend a job fair? So like I said, I'm sort of outside of this, but this has been one of the processes that they've done basically every year. Now with COVID, that may change for this upcoming year, I don't know, but that has been the general process, that our Office of Student Employment gets in touch with students who have work study to get them, to help them find on-campus employment.
I'll just add anecdotally that searching out those different jobs is something that can be really accommodating to different schedules. For example, when I was a student one semester, I had a crazy schedule. I was taking extra classes to try and finish a minor in addition to my major. So I added in a little bit extra, and I was so busy. The only time I had free was between like 6 and 7 in the morning, but that's when the mailroom was looking for student employees. Another year, I was helping out in a computer lab where students could come and print out their papers or type something up. It was in the library, and that was from 9 to 10 at night. And some of the campus jobs are going to allow students to do their homework while they work, like checking others in and out of the fitness center. Some of the very sought after campus jobs are going to be within departments doing something affiliated with what someone might be building their major and their career around. And so that's going to be something that serves a student, again, twofold, because they're going to be building that personal academic resume during their undergraduate years, and also, of course, being paid bi-weekly. They're going to get their train ticket money and their pizza and their shampoo money by doing that as well. Now, I'll ask Sarah just to answer a bit of the same question. What are some of the opportunities for students to find jobs on campus at Macalaster?
Yeah, so we have more of a serve yourself online version. So basically, there is a job board that's online for new incoming students, if you have accepted or plan to accept campus employment as part of your financial aid, you will receive an email, basically, and instructions in your new student portal, driving you to information about how to fill out the paperwork necessary for working on campus. For international students, that includes things like you'll need to file to get a social security number. So because you'll need to file taxes, as well as some other forms. And then you'll go through to the job site and basically you'll get to filter through and look at all the different options. Typically, for first year students, the most plentiful campus employment opportunities tend to be like the ones Carly was describing, of checking students into the fitness center or working in the dining hall is kind of a classic. I will say I learned more in my first year work study job in like one of the campus dining options than, you know, probably any other job I've held since, sorry to say. But, and then there's instructions about how to apply for that job. I will note that this year has thrown a wrench in a lot of things. And so I think, at least at Macalaster, we've worked hard to reimagine as many student employment opportunities as we can to be virtual, to allow students to still be able to do that. But it's also been challenging because there are, for example, our fitness center is closed right now. So not the availability of jobs on campus is not quite what it usually is because of the pandemic. But the college has been working with our current students to make sure that they know what jobs are out there, because we still have unclaimed jobs. So a little bit more of matchmaking. But then for this year, at least, we have created a basically unemployment insurance for students who qualify. So basically, if they've applied for a job and they're on campus and they desperately need these funds, if they are approved for this unemployment insurance, essentially, Macalaster will pay out up to 50% of their allotted award, even though they're not working. So again, that's kind of just a 1 year, we'll see what happens in the future. But yeah, I think there are lots of different ways you can find out about jobs, but job boards, job fairs, especially for first years, that tends to be the first place that you are learning about campus employment opportunities.
That insurance is a really fantastic option. I'm impressed. And to touch on something I think Sarah mentioned very early on in our presentation, there are differences between institutions that are public versus private. And while the institutions that are public do receive the benefit of a lot of state funding, they get those taxpayer dollars that circle back to you as someone who's getting in-state tuition if you're utilizing the state system, in particular public institutions. If you're a private college, there does come a certain nimbleness with not being beholden to the taxpayers and having taxpayer dollars, because you're able to do programs that can be very creative, and there is much less bureaucracy outside the campus. There's probably still some inside, but outside the campus, there's a lot less red tape to doing something that is very adept and very agile like that. And so you will find that the private colleges may vary more among themselves with some of those creative and adaptive approaches or differences in their policies than the public system, which is going to be more beholden to some very strict policies that will apply to many as a group. As we just have a couple minutes left in our session, I'll invite anyone who has an additional question to go ahead and send that in, or to be in touch with us. If you have a very specific question, it could be about a family-owned business or custodial circumstances or something like that. And I want to assure you that Robin in the financial aid office and Macalaster with their financial aid office have worked with a number of families over the years that have brought in every imaginable scenario. And if you'd like to reach out personally, they will be able to address however complicated or unique that situation might be. I'll just ask Robin to close us out this evening with some advice on getting in touch with financial aid. And I see that Sarah has also posted some of those links in the chat for being in touch with Macalaster. And Robin, if you have any last words of financial advice about navigating the financial aid process, if you want to share those as our financial aid guru panelist.
Sure. You know, two things come to mind. One is something that Sarah said, and that is contact the financial aid office if you have any questions. But the other thing too is I can guarantee if you don't apply for financial aid, you won't get a cent. I know I have some families that say, well, we don't think we're going to qualify. And it's like, granted, the net price calculators are a great resource to go to. I also know that the information you get out of a net price calculator is only as good as the information you put into it. And so the way I look at it is, if this is your first year applying for first year coming to college, apply for financial aid and find out. The FAFSA doesn't cost anything. Granted, the CSS Profile does, but apply for financial aid. Like Sarah said, and the same thing holds for F&M. You should be applying for financial aid, or we encourage you to apply for financial aid at the same time you are applying for admission. That way there, you'll have an idea as to what your eligibility is going to be. Plus, should there be a situation that crops up that has an impact on your family's financial status, at least we have a baseline to start from so that we can talk with you about possibly looking at an appeal to reevaluate your financial aid. I mean, this has been such an unusual year. And as we said, your family is going to be using their 2019 tax return. This is 2020. Things happened and may continue in 2021 as well. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it for right now.
I want to put "this is 2020, things happened" on like a bulletin board on my lawn. That says it all. Thank you to Robin. Thank you to Sarah. Very, very good advice, very good insight about both institutions, and some ideas about what's out there in the field a bit in general as you're navigating these questions as you finish your college lists and think about applying. Again, if you have any questions at all for either of our financial aid offices, if you respond to the email inviting you to join this Wednesday webinar, we will forward it to the appropriate audience, even if it's for Macalaster and it looks like you're sending it back to F&M. We will get your questions personally answered by those folks in either of the financial aid offices. Thank you for joining us this evening, and I hope you have a wonderful night or morning, depending where you are, because I know we have a couple international students with us. Bye-bye.